Originally, I'm a sociologist, so sociologists are always changing the status quo. We always want to have revolutions in some way or another. I decided it was a silent revolution. It was an easier way, which was transforming quality basic education initially in Colombia. So I had the possibility of having my good studies in Stanford. I came back with all my theory, all the research findings, everything. And then you start working in developing countries. And you see so many problems, so many problems. Like Charles Leadbeater says, some of the best innovations come from the developing world, from the margins of society, because we have to rethink everything. Education system in Colombia was like a failed company. Nothing worked, no results. I just don't want to make the list of all the problems. But it was it was unbelievable, no results. And and we know the theory for 100 years. We're not going to invent the theory, we know about Montessori, we know about John Dewey, we know about child-centered learning, we want to know about self-paced learning, we know about cooperative learning, we know about the new role of the teacher for the 21st century. So in a way, the Escuela Nueva, and I'll get back to your question, is like a little story of Cinderella, where we started with the most marginal schools, the invisible schools in the middle of nowhere. But they forced us to rethink everything because nothing was working. So the first thing was, here you have all this good sound educational theory, which is not new. How do you promote child-centered learning, self-paced, cooperative learning, all these things I mentioned, the new role of the teacher for the 21st century, not as an instructor, but as a facilitator, catalyzer. We said all these things 35 years ago. Why? Because the first thing we had to do was that anything from the outset had to be viable, technically speaking. That all these ideas, which are not new, how could a teacher, as I said, in the middle of nowhere, have results? So that would be viable technically. And you cannot find PhDs in the middle of the jungle in Colombia. So viable technically. Politically, we have strong unions in Latin America, so you have to learn to work with the teachers and the unions. The teachers were against the rural multi-grade schools I was working in because it was too much work. So we sort of had to reshape the technology to make it easier for the teacher. Teachers don't have time to plan wonderful lesson plans every day, and in a heterogeneous setting, a multi-grade setting, less. So that it was viable technically, politically, and of course financially. We had to think of cost effectiveness. If we wanted that our local innovation impact national policy like it did in Colombia, reaching 20,000 schools at the end of the 80s, and then I ended up being Vice Minister of Education, we took it to scale. And once the World Bank came into the picture and selected that as one of the 3 innovations that had successfully impacted national policies, we had to think of cost effectiveness. When you start talking to the World Bank, you have to think of unitary cost per child, things like this. So these 3 these conditions we had to have from the outset so that we could have big impact at national level. And then when we were convincing the Vietnamese, like we did, they're taking Escuela Nueva to Vietnam. We had to have these things also in place. So you do have to have conditions when you want to have a local innovation have big impact at national level, definitely. Viable technically, politically, and financially.